The morning air at Camp Pendleton Scout Sniper Range carried the sharp scent of cordite and sage. Corporal Sarah Chun settled behind her M2010 ESR rifle, the weapon's weight familiar against her shoulder as she adjusted her position on the elevated platform. The target sat 3,247 meters downrange, a distance that would push every limit of her training and the ballistics involved. Sergeant Martinez knelt beside her with the spotting scope, his weathered face impassive as he confirmed the range one final time. 3,247.3 meters, he said. Wind 12 miles per hour from the west. Temperature 68 degrees. Chen's fingers moved across her data card, calculating the corrections needed for a shot that would require over 6 seconds of flight time. The Coriolis effect alone demanded compensation, the Earth's rotation pulling the bullet during its long arc through the atmosphere. She factored in the elevation difference of 892 feet, the temperature gradient across that distance, the density altitude that would affect the projectile's path. In the observation tower 50 meters behind them, Lieutenant Hayes adjusted the high-speed camera system, while Staff Sergeant Rodriguez monitored the ballistic computer. The equipment hummed with precision, every sensor calibrated that morning to record what would either be a historic achievement or an expensive miss. Captain Morrison stood between them, his clipboard ready to document the attempt for the official range records. Chen exhaled slowly, finding the natural pause between heartbeats. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with the familiar pressure, the suppressor managing most of the blast, but not the raw physics of sending a 220-grain projectile toward a target most people couldn't see with binoculars. The bullet traced its path downrange, invisible except to the cameras tracking its flight. 6.4 seconds stretched into an eternity while gravity and wind resistance battled the initial velocity of 2,800 feet per second. Martinez watched through the spotting scope, his breathing suspended as the moment approached completion. Target impact, Martinez said, his voice careful and controlled. Dead center. Rodriguez straightened from the ballistic computer, checking the readings a second time before allowing himself to react. The system registered the hit at 3,247.3 meters, every data point confirmed by the automated verification system. He ran the diagnostics again, then a third time, each result identical. Morrison picked up his radio to notify range control of the qualification result. This was the kind of shot that made careers, the kind that ended up in marksmanship manuals and training lectures for decades. He was already composing the documentation in his mind when the sound of boots on gravel announced an unexpected arrival. Commander Jack Brennan's SEAL team had their range times scheduled for the next block, but the officer himself arrived early, drawn by the sight of Marines celebrating around the observation tower. His jaw tightened as he approached, the clusters of Navy achievement medals on his chest catching the morning light. "What's the commotion?" Brennan demanded as he reached Morrison's position. His tone carried the assumption that celebrations during his scheduled range time constituted some form of violation. Morrison gestured to the tower where Rodriguez was downloading camera footage to the secure drive. "Corporal Chun just qualified at 3,247 meters, he explained. "Confirmed hit. All verification systems log the data." Brennan's expression shifted from annoyance to disbelief, then settled into something harder. "That's not possible," he said flatly. "Marine Corps equipment doesn't have the precision for that range. There must be a calibration error." Rodriguez descended from the tower with the preliminary documentation, 6 pages of data confirming what Martinez had seen through the spotting scope. He offered the paperwork to Brennan, prepared to walk through the verification procedures they'd followed to the letter. Brennan waved the documentation away without looking at it. "I don't need to see computer printouts," he said. "Equipment malfunctions happen. This needs a full technical review before anyone submits anything official." Morrison's expression remained neutral, but his stance shifted slightly. "Sir, the shot was verified by 6 independent systems," he said. "The camera footage shows the bullet trace and impact. The ballistic computer tracked the entire flight path. The laser rangefinder confirmed the distance independently. Then your systems all need recalibration, Brennan countered. My team holds the long-range records in this theater. A Marine corporal doesn't just show up and break established marks without serious questions about the data. The observation tower had gone quiet, Hayes and Rodriguez exchanging glances that said more than words could. Chen remained at the firing line, breaking down her rifle with methodical precision while the discussion continued 50 meters away. I'm noting your objection in the range report, Morrison said carefully, but the qualification stands pending any technical review you want to request through proper channels. The data is solid. Brennan pulled out his phone, already composing an email before Morrison finished speaking. We'll see what command says about rushing record claims through without proper verification, he said. I want this flagged for review before it goes anywhere official. He turned without waiting for a response, striding back toward where his SEAL team was unloading their gear from 2 trucks. The Marines around the observation tower watched him go, the celebration energy draining away into something more complicated. Rodriguez looked at the documentation in his hands, then at Morrison. The captain nodded once, a small gesture that meant everything would be handled by the book regardless of what objections got filed by officers who hadn't bothered to examine the evidence. Chun finished securing her rifle in its case and walked toward the tower, her face showing nothing of whatever thoughts moved behind her eyes. She made the shot, felt it leave clean, watched through her scope as the target disintegrated at a distance most people considered impossible for small arms fire. What happened? She asked Martinez quietly as they watched Brennan's animated conversation with his team in the distance. Politics, Martinez replied, the single word carrying the weight of experience with how accomplishments could turn complicated when they challenged assumptions about who belonged at the top of the performance charts. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the last coastal haze while the range prepared for the SEAL team's training block. Chin's rifle case sat beside the observation tower, the weapon inside still warm from the shot that had just rewritten the record books, whether Commander Brennan wanted to acknowledge it or not. Rodriguez spent the next 2 hours in the equipment room, methodically reviewing every piece of documentation the morning had generated. The high-speed camera footage showed the bullet's trace as a dark line against the pale sky, the impact blooming across the target in a spray of material that left no doubt about the strike. He played it back 3 times at quarter speed, watching the physics unfold in precise detail. The ballistic computer had logged data every millisecond of the bullet's flight, creating a trajectory map that matched Chin's calculated adjustments within 2% variance. Rodriguez cross-referenced the weather station data with the environmental corrections she'd made, finding her math accurate to the point of textbook perfection. The laser rangefinder had verified the distance independently, its measurement differing from the surveyed range markers by less than a meter. Hayes arrived with a secure drive, already copying the camera files for backup storage. He pulled up the metadata on his laptop, showing Rodriguez the timestamps that proved all systems were recording simultaneously. No equipment malfunctions, no synchronization errors, no gaps in the data that would suggest technical problems. Did you see Brennan's face when Morrison told him about the shot? Hayes asked while the files transferred. Like someone had just announced the laws of physics were under new management. Rodriguez smiled despite himself, then returned his attention to the documentation. Brennan had submitted a written objection to Base Commander Kaufman within 90 minutes of leaving the range. Hayes had seen the email in the command system, flagged as priority correspondence regarding range qualification procedures. He didn't even ask to see the footage, Rodriguez said, tapping the screen where the bullet impact was frozen in perfect clarity. Just decided it was impossible and worked backward from there. Martinez pushed through the equipment room door, carrying a folder thick with Chen's previous qualification records. He spread them across the adjacent desk, pointing to entries that dated back 2 years. Afghanistan deployment, Martinez said. 1,800-meter confirmed kill on a Taliban commander. Took 8 months for official confirmation, even with witness statements from 3 different units. Rodriguez leaned over to examine the documentation. The delayed justifications were signed by Captain Patterson, Chen's commanding officer at the time. Equipment verification required. Additional witness interviews needed. Supplementary ballistic analysis requested. Each reason adding weeks to what should have been a straightforward confirmation. Hayes pulled up the sniper qualification database on his laptop, running a search for Chen's records. She'd achieved expert sniper rating faster than 94% of male Marines in the same qualification period. Yet her application to Scout Sniper School had been rejected twice. The first rejection cited lax demonstrated consistency despite her 98% accuracy rate over 200 log shots. The second claimed insufficient field experience even though she'd just returned from a combat deployment. Something's wrong with this pattern, Hayes said, turning the laptop so both Rodriguez and Martinez could see the screen. Her numbers are better than half the people who got accepted. Rodriguez began cross-referencing other female snipers at Camp Pendleton, pulling personnel files that required his staff sergeant credentials to access. Corporal Williams had a 1,650-meter shot that took 6 months for confirmation. Sergeant Thompson had advanced training slots canceled twice with no explanation beyond scheduling conflicts. Lance Corporal Davis had equipment requests delayed 4 months, while male Marines with lower qualifications received priority processing. Martinez watched Rodriguez compile the information, his expression darkening. "How many cases are we looking at?" he asked. "At least 4 just at this base," Rodriguez replied. "Haven't checked other installations yet. But the delays are consistent. Female snipers getting their achievements questioned or postponed at rates that don't match the male qualification timeline." Hayes saved the database query results to the secure drive. "This is bigger than Brennan being difficult about one shot," he said. "This looks systemic." Rodriguez picked up his phone and called the base armory, reaching Chief Warrant Officer Watkins on the third ring. The conversation was brief and technical, Rodriguez asking about equipment calibration records for the morning's qualification. Watkins confirmed Chen's rifle had been calibrated at 0700 hours, within .01 mil radian specification. The ballistic computer had passed its 47-point diagnostic that same morning. All equipment was functioning perfectly, the same systems used by SEAL teams and Marine Scout snipers without distinction. So Brennan's claiming equipment problems with systems that passed inspection 3 hours before Chen's shot, Hayes said after Rodriguez ended the call. Systems his own people use without complaint. Martinez gathered Chen's records back into their folder. "She's an admin right now, doing post-qualification paperwork," he said. "Someone should probably tell her about Brennan's formal challenge before she hears it through the rumor network." Rodriguez checked his watch. The challenge would trigger a mandatory review, standard procedure whenever an officer questioned qualification documentation. The review itself wasn't the problem. The delay was. Chen's record submission would be frozen pending investigation completion, potentially taking weeks while Brennan's objections were formally addressed. "I'll get this evidence package to Morrison," Rodriguez said, organizing the documentation into a clean folder. Camera footage, computer logs, weather data, rangefinder readings, equipment calibration records, Chen's qualification history. Everything shows the shot was legitimate and properly verified. Hayes ejected the secure drive and handed it to Rodriguez. 6 independent verification systems, he said, all showing the same result. Most confirmed kills in history don't have this much documentation. The 3 Marines left the equipment room together, Martinez heading toward the admin building to find Chen while Rodriguez and Hayes made their way to Morrison's office. The base was transitioning into afternoon operations, Marines moving between training areas with the purposeful efficiency that made Camp Pendleton function like a small city. Chen was leaving the admin building as Martinez approached, her expression carefully neutral. The records clerk had already informed her about Brennan's formal challenge, explaining that her qualification paperwork would be held pending review completion. The clerk had seemed apologetic, as if recognizing the absurdity of questioning a shot that 6 different systems had verified independently. "How long for the review?" Chen asked Martinez as they walked toward the company area. "Could be weeks," Martinez replied. "Brennan's claiming equipment calibration issues." Command has to investigate formally before they can dismiss the challenge. Chen nodded, her pace never changing. The equipment was calibrated this morning, she said. I watched Watkins do the final checks myself. I know, Martinez said. Rodriguez is putting together the complete documentation now. Everything that proves the shot was clean. They reached the company area where Chen's squad was conducting equipment maintenance. Several Marines looked up as she approached, questions evident on their faces. Word had already spread through the base network. The usual mixture of accurate information and creative speculation that accompanied any unusual event. Chen sat down with her rifle case and began the detailed cleaning that followed every range session, her hands moving through the familiar routine while conversations continued around her. Martinez watched for a moment, recognizing the focus she used to block out distractions that couldn't be controlled. Rodriguez arrived at Morrison's office to find the captain on the phone with someone at division headquarters. Morrison's side of the conversation was careful and precise, confirming details about the morning's qualification and acknowledging that a formal challenge had been filed. When he ended the call, his expression showed the fatigue of dealing with administrative complications that shouldn't exist. Division wants the complete file, Morrison said. Everything we've got on the qualification and the equipment verification. Rodriguez handed over the folder he'd compiled. 6 independent systems, sir, he said, all verified and calibrated. The shot was clean. Morrison flipped through the documentation, pausing at the equipment calibration records. Brennan filed his challenge without reviewing any of this, he said, tapping the folder. Never asked to see the footage, never questioned the specific data, just declared it impossible and demanded a review. Politics, Rodriguez said, echoing Martinez's earlier assessment. Morrison closed the folder and locked it in his desk safe. I'm submitting this to Division regardless of Brennan's challenge, he said. The qualification stands on the evidence. But Chen's record submission gets delayed while they process the formal objection. How long? Rodriguez asked. Weeks minimum, Morrison replied. Maybe longer if Brennan keeps pushing. Rodriguez left the office and headed back to the equipment room, where Hayes was creating additional backup copies of all digital files. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, marking the passage of time that would stretch into delays Chun didn't deserve but couldn't avoid. The range sat quiet now, the SEAL team having completed their training and departed. The observation tower stood empty, its equipment powered down until the next qualification session. 3,247 meters downrange, the target Chun had destroyed remained in place. Physical proof of an achievement that was already disappearing into administrative review procedures designed to question what 6 different systems had confirmed beyond doubt. Rodriguez spent the following morning in the base records office, pulling Chen's complete personnel file from the digital archive. The system required staff, sergeant credentials, and a documented reason for access, both of which he provided before the files populated across his screen. What he found in the qualification history section made him reach for a notepad to track the timeline. Chen's 1,800-meter kill in Afghanistan had occurred on March 15th, 2 years prior. The confirmation hadn't been finalized until November 8th of that same year, nearly 8 months after the shot. Rodriguez clicked through the delay justifications, each one signed by Captain Patterson, who'd commanded Chen's unit during that deployment. Equipment verification required, the first entry read. Additional witness interviews needed, stated the second. Supplementary ballistic analysis requested, claimed the third. Rodriguez pulled the confirmation timelines for 5 male Marines who'd achieved similar distance kills during the same deployment period. The longest delay was 6 weeks. Most were confirmed within 3. Hayes arrived with coffee and his laptop, settling into the adjacent workstation. He'd been running database queries since dawn, cross-referencing female sniper qualifications against their male counterparts across the entire base population. The results painted a picture that statistics made difficult to dismiss as coincidence. 4 female snipers currently assigned to Camp Pendleton, Hayes said, turning his screen toward Rodriguez. All 4 show qualification delays or training denials that don't match their performance metrics. He pulled up Corporal Williams' file first. Her 1,650-meter shot had taken 6 months for confirmation despite clear documentation from range observers. Sergeant Thompson had applied for advanced sniper training 3 times, each application rejected for reasons that shifted with each submission. Lance Corporal Davis had equipment requests delayed 4 months, while male Marines with equivalent qualifications received approval within 2 weeks. Rodriguez made notes on each case, building a comparison table that showed the disparities. The pattern emerged with mathematical clarity. Female snipers faced delays and denials at rates roughly 4 times higher than their male peers when controlling for qualification scores and experience levels. This goes beyond Brennan, Rodriguez said, staring at the data. This is institutional. Hayes pulled up Chen's Scout Sniper School application history. She'd applied twice, both applications rejected, despite her expert sniper rating placing her in the top 6% of all qualified personnel. The first rejection cited lax demonstrated consistency, a phrase Hayes found particularly notable given Chen's 98% accuracy rate over 200 documented shots. The second rejection claimed insufficient field experience, submitted 3 weeks after she'd returned from Afghanistan with a confirmed combat kill. Who approved these rejections? Rodriguez asked. Hayes clicked through the authorization trail. First one was Patterson during her time in 2nd Battalion, he said. Second one came from operations after she transferred here. Signed by Major Kowalski. Rodriguez pulled Kowalski's duty assignments, finding the officer currently deployed to Okinawa. The rejection timeline showed a pattern Rodriguez was beginning to recognize. Decisions made quickly when denying opportunities, processed slowly when confirming achievements. Chen's personnel file included her training applications dating back 3 years. Rodriguez found her request to attend SHOT Show Sniper competition the previous year, denied due to budget constraints according to the official response. Martinez had mentioned this denial during their earlier conversation, noting that a male Marine with lower qualification scores had been sent to the same event. Rodriguez found that Marine's authorization in the system approved within 48 hours of submission. What was the budget justification for denying Chen? Hayes asked, pulling up the financial records for that quarter. There wasn't one, Rodriguez replied. Just the phrase budget constraints without any supporting documentation. Hayes ran a query on all SHOT Show attendance authorizations for the previous year. 8 Marines had attended, 7 male and 1 female. The female Marine was a supply specialist accompanying the group for logistics coordination, not a competitive shooter. Every sniper selected had lower qualification scores than Chen. This is going in the report, Hayes said, adding the information to his growing documentation file. Rodriguez contacted Martinez by phone, asking about additional incidents that might not appear in official records. Martinez described Chen's application for designated marksman instructor school, submitted by him personally 3 separate times. Each submission had disappeared into the administrative system without response or denial, simply failing to generate any decision. After the 3rd attempt, Martinez had been told informally that the slots were committed through the next cycle and resubmission would be considered after that period concluded. The slots were committed to who? Rodriguez asked. Martinez provided 3 names. Rodriguez pulled their qualification records, finding scores and experience levels that suggested Chen should have been selected ahead of all of them. Hayes discovered another pattern in the range scheduling database. SEAL teams, despite being stationed at Naval Base Coronado rather than Camp Pendleton, received priority access to the long-range facilities. Their allocation consumed 40% of available training time, while Marine Scout snipers, including Chen's unit, received 25%. The remaining time was distributed among other units with various training requirements. Why do SEALs get priority on Marine Corps ranges? Hayes asked, though his tone suggested he already understood the political dynamics involved. Because they ask for it and someone approves it, Rodriguez said. Probably the same someone who thinks Marines can't make shots beyond certain distances. He compiled the information into a single document. Chen's 18-month history of delayed confirmations and denied opportunities, the pattern affecting 3 other female snipers, the qualification comparison data showing disparities that statistics couldn't explain as random variation, the training allocation decisions that favored male Marines despite lower performance metrics. Martinez arrived at the records office carrying another folder, this one containing statement from Marines who'd witnessed various incidents over the past year. One statement described Chun being denied a training slot at the Mountain Warfare Training Center, told the course was full, then watching 3 male Marines with recent qualification scores below hers receive authorization the following week. Another statement documented her request for upgraded optics being delayed 7 months, while similar requests for male snipers were processed within 30 days. This needs to go higher than Morrison, Rodriguez said, reviewing the accumulated evidence. This is beyond a single commander's authority to address. Hayes agreed, though both men recognized the risks involved in escalating issues up the command chain. Marines who identified problems sometimes found themselves labeled as troublemakers rather than reformers, their careers stalling in ways that couldn't be easily documented or appealed. Chun deserves better than having her shot questioned by someone who never looked at the evidence, Rodriguez said. And these other Marines deserve opportunities based on their qualifications, not their gender. Martinez gathered the statements back into his folder. Patterson told Chun not to make waves during her qualification period, he said. Told her to focus on performance and let the system work. The system isn't working, Hayes replied. That's the problem. Rodriguez saved all documentation to a secure drive, creating encrypted backups that would survive any attempts to make the evidence disappear. He'd seen files vanish from servers before, always during investigations that threatened to embarrass senior leadership. This evidence would be preserved regardless of who found it inconvenient. The base continued its afternoon routine outside the records office windows. Marines moving between training areas without awareness of the patterns being documented 3 floors above them. Chun was at the range again, Rodriguez knew, maintaining her skills while administrative reviews processed her achievement through layers of skepticism that data should have eliminated immediately. By evening, Rodriguez had compiled a report showing systematic disparities across 18 months of qualification and training decisions. The statistics were clear, the individual cases were documented, and the pattern was undeniable. Female snipers at Camp Pendleton faced obstacles their male counterparts never encountered, their achievements questioned, and their opportunities delayed by margins too consistent to attribute to coincidence. Morrison needed to see this, but Rodriguez suspected Morrison already knew the broader pattern existed. The captain's careful responses during earlier conversations suggested awareness of dynamics. He lacked the authority to change alone. This evidence would require engagement from command levels high enough to reform institutional practices rather than just process individual complaints. Rodriguez locked the files in Morrison's safe that evening, accompanied by a memo requesting guidance on proper reporting channels for systemic issues. The memo was carefully worded, professional in tone, focused on facts rather than accusations. But the facts themselves were damning enough without editorial commentary. Chin's achievement sat frozen in administrative review while these patterns continued affecting every female sniper on base. The question wasn't whether the evidence proved discrimination. The question was whether anyone with sufficient authority cared enough to act on what the evidence revealed. Rodriguez requested the meeting with Base Commander Colonel Kaufman through proper channels, noting in his written request that the matter involved qualification procedures and potential systemic issues requiring command review. Kaufman's aide scheduled the meeting for 0900 the following morning, allocating 30 minutes on the colonel's calendar. Rodriguez arrived with the complete evidence package organized in a 3-ring binder, each section tabbed for quick reference. The camera footage was loaded on a tablet, ready to display at Kaufman's request. Hayes had compiled the statistical analysis into charts that made the patterns visually obvious even to someone unfamiliar with the underlying data. Kaufman's office occupied the corner of the headquarters building with windows overlooking the main parade ground. The colonel sat behind a desk that held neat stacks of paperwork and a computer displaying what appeared to be the morning's operational briefings. He gestured Rodriguez to the chair across from him and accepted the binder without comment. "What am I looking at?" Staff Sergeant Kaufman asked, opening to the first tab section. "Evidence regarding Corporal Chin's qualification and related patterns affecting female snipers on this base, sir," Rodriguez replied. The shot was verified by 6 independent systems, but Commander Brennan filed a challenge without examining any documentation. Kaufman began reading through the verification records. Rodriguez watched the colonel's expression remain neutral as he reviewed the camera footage metadata, the ballistic computer logs, the equipment calibration certificates, and the range officer reports. Each document confirmed what the others showed. Chin's shot was legitimate and properly verified according to every applicable standard. "The challenge lacks technical foundation," Kaufman said after 15 minutes of silent review. "What else is in here?" Rodriguez guided him to the pattern analysis section. "Chin's qualification delays over 18 months, sir," he said. 3 other female snipers with similar issues. Comparison data showing male Marines with lower scores receiving faster approvals and more training opportunities. Kaufman spent another 20 minutes examining the comparison charts, occasionally referring back to specific cases for additional context. His questions were precise and focused on verification. Had Rodriguez confirmed these numbers personally with the data source's official records? Could the analysis withstand scrutiny from someone looking for methodological flaws? Rodriguez answered each question with specifics. "Yes, sir," pulled directly from the personnel database. "Yes, sir," all official documentation. "Yes, sir." Hayes ran multiple verification queries to ensure accuracy. "This shows systematic disparities," Kaufman said, closing the binder. "You're aware this kind of allegation requires investigation beyond my authority to conduct independently." "Yes, sir," Rodriguez replied. "That's why I'm bringing it to your attention rather than attempting to address it at company level." Kaufman picked up his desk phone and dialed a number from memory. The conversation that followed was brief and formal. Kaufman requesting to speak with Major General Sarah Holland at Marine Corps Combat Development Command in Quantico. The connection took 3 minutes to establish, routed through multiple secure channels before Holland's voice came through the speaker. "General, I have a situation requiring your guidance," Kaufman said, launching into a concise summary of Chin's shot, Brennan's challenge, and a pattern Rodriguez had documented. He described the verification systems, the statistical disparities, and the 18-month timeline showing consistent delays affecting female snipers. Holland asked questions that demonstrated immediate grasp of both the technical and institutional dimensions involved. She wanted to know about the equipment calibration procedures, the independence of the verification systems, the sample sizes in Rodriguez's comparison data, and the range of qualification scores involved in the training opportunity decisions. Kaufman answered what he could and deferred to Rodriguez for the technical details. Rodriguez provided specifics about the verification protocols, the database queries Hayes had run, and the statistical margins that made the patterns impossible to dismiss as random variation. "Colonel, I need you to preserve all documentation and continue normal operations while I consult with Manpower and Reserve Affairs," Holland said. "Chin's qualification should proceed through verification independent of any challenge that lacks technical merit. Schedule a formal review meeting within 48 hours and notify all relevant parties." "Understood, General," Kaufman replied. "One more thing," Holland added. "Make sure Staff Sergeant Rodriguez documents how he became aware of these patterns. If this investigation expands, we'll need clear chains of evidence showing organic discovery rather than directed fishing expeditions." The call ended with Holland promising follow-up within 24 hours after consulting with the appropriate departments at headquarters. Kaufman set the phone down and looked at Rodriguez with an expression that mixed appreciation and concern. "You just put a target on your back," the colonel said. "People who benefit from current systems don't appreciate Marines who document how those systems function." "Sir, the evidence documents itself," Rodriguez replied. "I just compiled what was already in official records." Kaufman nodded, though his expression suggested he understood the distinction between technical accuracy and political reality. He drafted an email while Rodriguez waited, notifying Morrison, Brennan, and several other officers about the scheduled review meeting. The subject line read formal review, Chun qualification documentation and related matters, language carefully chosen to indicate scope beyond a simple equipment dispute. Brennan's response arrived within 10 minutes, a terse acknowledgement copied to his commanding officer at Naval Special Warfare Group 3. Rodriguez watched Kaufman read the email, noting the colonel's slight frown at whatever Brennan had written. Commander Brennan characterizes this as Marines overreacting to routine equipment challenges, Kaufman said. He's copied Captain Richards, presumably to build support for his position. Will Richards attend the review? Rodriguez asked. He's invited, Kaufman replied. Whether he chooses to involve himself in what's becoming a documented pattern of questionable decisions remains his choice. Rodriguez left the meeting with instructions to ensure all evidence remained secured and accessible for the formal review. Kaufman kept the original binder, stating it would be logged as official command documentation to prevent any suggestion that evidence had been manufactured or manipulated after the fact. Hayes was waiting in the administrative office when Rodriguez returned, having monitored email traffic through the morning. Morrison had already received notification of the review meeting, along with instructions to bring his complete range documentation and verification procedures manual. Brennan had been directed to present technical justification for his equipment challenge, with specific emphasis on what analysis he'd conducted before filing the formal objection. This is moving fast, Hayes observed. Kaufman doesn't waste time once he decides something needs addressing. Rodriguez agreed, though he recognized that speed at this level often meant the issue had triggered concerns extending beyond simple procedural compliance. Holland's involvement indicated Marine Corps headquarters viewed the pattern as potentially affecting more than just Camp Pendleton operations. Chun was at the range when Rodriguez arrived that afternoon, working through a training sequence with Martinez observing. She completed her drill and cleared her weapon before acknowledging Rodriguez's presence. Her expression neutral, as always when faced with administrative complications she couldn't control through performance. There's a formal review meeting scheduled in 2 days, Rodriguez told her. Colonel Kaufman is presiding. Brennan's been directed to present technical justification for his challenge. Chin nodded, processing the information without visible reaction. Do I need to attend? She asked. Not required, but you're welcome to observe, Rodriguez replied. Morrison will be presenting the verification documentation. I'll be there, Chin said. If someone's questioning my qualification, I want to hear their technical reasoning directly. Martinez watched the exchange with the careful attention of someone who'd seen promising careers derailed by institutional resistance that couldn't be overcome through skill alone. He'd been coaching Chun for 3 years, watching her outperform peers who received opportunities she was denied, maintaining faith that eventually merit would receive proper recognition. The system's supposed to reward excellence, Martinez said after Chun returned to her equipment maintenance. Sometimes the system needs Marines like Rodriguez to remind it what excellence looks like regardless of who achieves it. Rodriguez walked back to headquarters as the afternoon heat settled over the base. The formal review would force Brennan to defend a challenge he'd filed without examining evidence, exposing the absence of technical foundation for his objections. But the broader pattern Rodriguez had documented would require sustained attention from commands high enough to reform institutional practices rather than simply resolving individual disputes. Kaufman had protected the evidence by logging it officially. Holland had engaged from Quantico, bringing headquarters resources to bear on what could have remained a local issue easily buried through administrative attrition. And Chin's shot remained verified by 6 independent systems that no reasonable challenge could discredit. The next 48 hours would determine whether documentation of systemic problems led to meaningful reform or simply generated defensive resistance from people invested in maintaining current practices. Rodriguez had done what duty required by bringing the evidence forward. What command chose to do with that evidence would reveal whether the Marine Corps meant what it said about rewarding performance regardless of gender. The parade ground stretched empty in the afternoon sun, waiting for the evening formation that marked the transition from day to night operations. Rodriguez headed back to his office to prepare for the review meeting, knowing the evidence was sound but uncertain whether sound evidence would prove sufficient against institutional momentum that had sustained these patterns for 18 months without generating prior intervention from anyone with authority to change them. The review meeting convened in Conference Room Alpha at precisely 0900. The space configured with a rectangular table and enough chairs for the 8 people Kaufman had summoned. Rodriguez arrived early with Hayes, both carrying documentation they'd spent the previous evening organizing into presentation-ready format. Morrison entered with his range operations manual and verification procedures, the thick binders representing decades of protocols designed to ensure qualification legitimacy. Brennan arrived exactly at the scheduled time, accompanied by no technical experts or equipment specialists despite the meeting's stated purpose. He wore his service khakis with the ribbons and insignia that marked 16 years of operational experience, settling into a chair with the confidence of someone accustomed to his credentials carrying inherent authority. Chun entered last, taking a seat along the wall rather than at the main table. Martinez sat beside her, his presence unofficial but tolerated given his role as her primary spotter and instructor. Chief Warrant Officer Watkins represented the Armory perspective, prepared to address any questions about equipment calibration or maintenance protocols. Kaufman called the meeting to order with minimal preamble. This review addresses Commander Brennan's formal challenge to Corporal Chin's qualification at 3,247 meters, he stated. Commander, please present your technical basis for questioning the verification. Brennan shifted forward in his chair, his posture suggesting he'd expected a different meeting structure. Marine Corps ballistic computers lack the sophisticated algorithms SEAL teams employ for extreme range calculations. He began. Calibration drift can occur between scheduled maintenance periods, creating false confidence in data that appears valid on initial review. Morrison made notes while Brennan spoke, his expression neutral, but his pen moving with deliberate precision. Additionally, Brennan continued, wind sensors positioned per standard protocols may not capture microclimate variations that affect bullet flight over distances exceeding 3,000 meters. The shot result, while impressive, raises questions about whether verification systems adequately account for variables at these extreme ranges. Kaufman turned to Watkins. Chief addressed the calibration claims. Watkins opened his maintenance log, showing entries from the morning of Chin's qualification. Corporal Chin's rifle was calibrated at 0700 hours, sir, he said, within .01 mil radian specification, which exceeds the .05 standard. The ballistic computer passed its 47-point diagnostic that same morning, all parameters within acceptable ranges. He produced calibration certificates with timestamps and digital signatures that verified the documented maintenance had actually occurred. The equipment specifications are identical to systems used by SEAL teams, he added. Same manufacturer, same software version, same calibration protocols. There's no technical difference in algorithmic sophistication. Brennan's jaw tightened slightly, though his expression remained controlled. The specifications may be identical on paper, he said, but implementation and maintenance standards vary between units. I'm suggesting the possibility of undetected degradation. Hayes stood and activated the wall-mounted display, bringing up the high-speed camera footage. This footage shows the bullet trace from firing line to target impact, he said. Computer analysis tracked the trajectory every 5 meters, confirming calculations were accurate within 2% variance. Independent analysis by Naval Surface Warfare Center confirmed these findings. The video played in real time, 6.4 seconds of ballistic physics rendered visible through specialized cameras. The bullet's path matched Chin's calculated trajectory within margins that eliminated equipment malfunction as a plausible explanation. Commander Brennan, did you request to review this footage before filing your challenge? Kaufman asked. No, sir, Brennan admitted. I assessed the claimed distance as exceeding realistic capabilities for standard Marine Corps equipment and training protocols. Morrison spoke for the first time, since the meeting began. Sir, the challenge was filed within 90 minutes of the qualification, he said. Commander Brennan observed celebrations at the range, but declined to examine any verification data before submitting his formal objection. Brennan's expression hardened. My professional experience provides context for evaluating claims that fall outside established performance parameters, he said. SEAL teams hold legitimate long-range records in this theater. When Marines claim to exceed those marks, additional scrutiny is warranted. Rodriguez watched Kaufman's reaction, noting the colonel's slight lean forward that indicated he'd caught the shift in Brennan's argument from technical concerns to jurisdictional ones. Commander, this review is about technical merit, not organizational pride, Kaufman said. Do you have specific technical evidence suggesting equipment malfunction or calibration error? Brennan hesitated, recognizing he'd revealed more than intended. I'm suggesting that single-shot success doesn't establish consistent capability, he said, pivoting to new ground. Marine Corps qualification standards should require replication before accepting extreme range claims. Morrison flipped through his operations manual to the relevant section. Sir, Marine Corps Regulation MCRP 301A specifies that single verified shot at documented distance qualifies per standard protocol, he said. Replication requirements don't exist for qualification purposes, only for specialized instructor certifications. Rodriguez added Chen's qualification history to the display, showing her 1,800-meter Afghanistan kill, her 2,100-meter training shot, and her 98% accuracy rate over 200 documented attempts at various ranges. Corporal Chen's consistency exceeds standard qualification requirements, he said. Her performance is documented across multiple deployments and training cycles. Brennan studied the data on the screen, his options narrowing as each technical objection encountered documented refutation. These are impressive numbers, he said carefully. But qualification decisions require judgment beyond raw data. Context matters when evaluating performance claims. What context are you referencing? Commander Kaufman asked, his tone sharpening slightly. The context of maintaining credible standards in a combat arms specialty where lives depend on accurate capability assessment, Brennan replied. Rushing approvals to generate positive publicity undermines that credibility. Chen's expression flickered, the first visible reaction she'd shown since entering the room. Martinez's hand moved slightly toward her arm, a gesture of solidarity that stopped just short of actual contact. Commander Brennan, have you reviewed any documentation related to this qualification before this moment? Kaufman asked directly. I reviewed the initial range report that described the claimed distance, Brennan said. That report alone raised sufficient questions to warrant formal challenge. So you filed a challenge based on distance claim alone, without examining verification systems, equipment calibration records, camera footage, computer data, or the Marines' qualification history, Kaufman stated, turning each element into a separate failure. I relied on professional judgment based on 16 years of operational experience, Brennan said, his voice carrying an edge now. That experience indicates extreme skepticism is appropriate when performance claims exceed established records. Kaufman closed the folder in front of him with deliberate finality. Commander, your challenge lacks technical foundation, he said. 6 independent verification systems confirm Corporal Chen's qualification. Equipment calibration records show all systems functioning within specification. Your objections appear based on assumptions rather than analysis. Sir, I request additional time to consult with technical experts who can provide more detailed evaluation, Brennan said. Your challenge has been under review for 7 days, Kaufman replied. You've had ample time to gather technical support if legitimate concerns existed. This review is concluded. Brennan stood, his posture rigid. Sir, I'm formally noting my continuing concerns about verification adequacy for record consideration purposes, he said. Your concerns are noted and dismissed, Kaufman stated. Corporal Chen's qualification is approved for submission to Marine Corps Marksmanship Program. This meeting is concluded. The room emptied in stages. Brennan departing first without acknowledging anyone. Morrison gathered his documentation with visible relief, while Watkins exchanged a significant glance with Rodriguez that communicated volumes about what they'd just witnessed. Chen remained seated until only Martinez, Rodriguez, and Hayes remained with her. She stood slowly, her composure intact despite the tension that had filled the room for the past hour. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant," she said to Rodriguez, "for documenting what needed to be documented. Just doing what the evidence required." "Ma'am," Rodriguez replied. Martinez walked Chun back toward the company area while Rodriguez and Hayes headed to their office. The formal challenge had been defeated, Chen's qualification would proceed, and the documentation of Brennan's baseless objections was now part of the official record. But Rodriguez knew the broader pattern remained unaddressed. The review had resolved one challenge to one qualification. The 18-month history of systematic delays affecting 4 female snipers still required intervention from authorities with power to reform institutional practices rather than simply adjudicate individual disputes. Kaufman had protected Chen's achievement. Whether he would pursue the larger issues Rodriguez had documented remained uncertain. The colonel had the evidence, Holland had the authority, and the pattern was undeniable. What came next would determine whether this victory represented an isolated correction or the beginning of systematic reform that addressed the root causes Rodriguez had spent days documenting. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the coastal haze while Camp Pendleton continued its operations. Chen's qualification was approved, her record would be submitted, and her achievement would receive the recognition 6 independent systems had verified from the moment her bullet struck home at a distance most people couldn't imagine reaching with small arms fire. The question now was whether anyone with sufficient authority cared enough to ensure the next female Marine with exceptional skills wouldn't face the same obstacles Chun had overcome through performance that couldn't be questioned even by commanders determined to try. Major General Holland placed the call to Equal Opportunity Division at Marine Corps headquarters within 2 hours of receiving Kaufman's after-action report from the review meeting. The report detailed Brennan's inability to provide technical justification, his admission of filing challenges without examining evidence, and the documented pattern Rodriguez had compiled showing systematic disparities affecting female snipers. Colonel Marcus Wade answered on the second ring, his position as EO Division Chief, making him the logical point of contact for investigations involving potential discrimination patterns. Holland summarized the situation with precision, describing Chen's case as the visible element of what appeared to be institutional bias spanning 18 months and affecting multiple Marines. "I need a formal investigation," Holland told Wade. "Not just Chen's qualification, but the entire pattern of delays and denials Rodriguez documented. This goes beyond individual decisions into systematic practice." Wade requested the complete file, which Holland transmitted through secure channels while they remained on the call. The documentation included Rodriguez's comparison analysis, the qualification timeline disparities, the training opportunity decisions favoring male Marines despite lower performance scores, and the range scheduling allocations giving SEAL teams priority access to Marine Corps facilities. The statistical margins are significant, Wade observed after reviewing the charts Hayes had compiled. For 0.2 times normal delay rate for female versus male snipers. That's beyond what random variation would produce. Holland agreed, noting that the pattern persisted across multiple decision makers over 18 months, suggesting institutional acceptance of practices that disadvantage female Marines regardless of their objective qualifications. Wade identified 7 individuals requiring interviews based on their roles in qualification approvals, training assignments, and range scheduling decisions. The list included Brennan, Captain Patterson, who'd commanded Chun during her Afghanistan deployment, Major Kowalski, who'd rejected her Scout Sniper School applications, and 4 others with authorization authority over the decisions Rodriguez had flagged. "I'm assigning this as a priority investigation," Wade said. "Timeline is 60 days for initial findings, 90 days for complete report with recommendations." Holland issued formal directives to Kaufman within the hour. Chen's qualification was approved immediately for submission to Marine Corps Marksmanship Program, independent of any residual concerns Brennan might harbor. The separate EO investigation would proceed under Wade's authority with full cooperation required from all Camp Pendleton personnel. Kaufman was directed to ensure no retaliation occurred against Chun, Rodriguez, Hayes, or any other Marines who'd provided information. All communications regarding the case required preservation as potential evidence. Kaufman summoned Chun to his office that afternoon, the notification formal enough to cause brief concern until she arrived and found the colonel's expression neutral rather than disciplinary. He informed her that her qualification was officially recognized and would be submitted immediately for record consideration. The 18-month pattern of delays affecting her and other female snipers was under formal investigation by Marine Corps headquarters, though her participation beyond providing a statement when requested remained optional rather than mandatory. Chun absorbed the information with characteristic composure, though her questions reveal the uncertainty that official investigations generated even when theoretically working in someone's favor. Would this affect her current assignment? She asked. Would the investigation require her testimony against officers who'd made the decisions Rodriguez documented? Would formal complaints appear in her personnel file, creating complications for future advancement? Kaufman addressed each concern methodically. Her assignment remained unchanged unless she requested transfer. The investigation sought to understand institutional patterns rather than prosecute individual decisions absent evidence of malicious intent. Any statement she provided would be protected under EO regulations prohibiting retaliation, and her personnel file would reflect only her cooperation with an official investigation if mentioned at all. You've earned recognition for exceptional performance, Corporal, Kaufman said. The Marine Corps owes you that recognition without the obstacles you've faced. This investigation ensures other Marines don't encounter the same barriers. Chun departed with instructions to contact Wade's office within 48 hours to schedule her formal statement. The investigation would proceed whether she participated actively or minimally, though her testimony would strengthen the documented pattern by providing first-hand accounts of how the delays and denials had affected her career progression and professional development. Wade initiated his investigation with document requests to 7 different commands, pulling personnel files, qualification records, training authorization histories, and correspondence files that might contain evidence of a decision-making processes Rodriguez had identified as problematic. The scope expanded as he reviewed the materials, discovering that the pattern extended beyond the 4 female snipers Rodriguez had initially documented. 6 additional cases emerged from other Marine Corps installations, showing similar delay patterns for female Marines in Scout Sniper and designated marksman specialties. Wade requested clarification from Manpower and Reserve Affairs about policies governing qualification timelines and training opportunity allocations, discovering that written policies existed, but enforcement mechanisms were largely absent at local command levels. Rodriguez and Hayes received interview requests from Wade's office, scheduled via video conference to minimize disruption to their regular duties. The interviews focused on how they'd discovered the patterns, what databases they'd accessed, whether anyone had directed them to look for disparities, or whether the investigation had developed organically from their verification of Chen's shot. Rodriguez explained that the pattern had become visible only when he'd compiled Chen's complete history while defending her qualification against Brennan's challenge. The comparison data emerged from standard database queries any staff sergeant with appropriate access could run. Nobody had directed the investigation. The evidence had simply accumulated as he documented what was already present in official records. Wade asked whether Rodriguez had experienced pressure to discontinue his investigation or warnings about career consequences for identifying institutional problems. Rodriguez stated that Morrison and Kaufman had supported his documentation efforts once they'd understood the scope involved, though he acknowledged awareness that some officers might view his actions as disruptive rather than corrective. Hayes provided technical details about the database queries and statistical analysis methods, walking Wade through the verification steps he'd taken to ensure the comparison data accurately reflected the underlying records. The methodology was sound, Hayes explained, using standard statistical techniques that any challenge to his findings would need to address through mathematical critique rather than procedural objection. Chin's interview occurred 3 days after the investigation's formal initiation, conducted via secure video from a private office at Camp Pendleton. Wade asked her to describe the 18-month period Rodriguez had documented, focusing on specific incidents where opportunities were denied or achievements delayed despite her meeting stated qualification requirements. She described applying for Scout Sniper School twice, receiving rejections that cited concerns her performance metrics directly contradicted. She explained requesting attendance at SHOT Show competition and being told budget constraints prevented approval, later learning male Marines with lower scores had attended. She detailed equipment requests that took months to process, while equivalent requests from male counterparts received approval within weeks. Wade asked whether anyone had explicitly stated that her gender influenced these decisions. Chin replied that nobody had used those words, but the cumulative pattern created an environment where female Marines understood they faced different standards than male peers with equivalent or lesser qualifications. Patterson had told her to focus on performance and avoid making waves, advised she'd interpret it as instruction to accept disparate treatment without complaint. "Did you file formal complaints about any of these incidents?" Wade asked. "No, sir," Chin replied. "I was told repeatedly that things take time and that questioning decisions during qualification periods could affect future opportunities." The message was clear: accept the delays or risk being labeled a problem Marine. Wade documented her responses in detailed notes, recognizing that her testimony provided the qualitative context that statistical analysis alone couldn't capture. The numbers showed disparate outcomes, but Chin's account revealed how those disparities affected individual Marines trying to build careers and specialties where institutional resistance operated through accumulated delays rather than explicit prohibitions. Brennan received notification of interview requests the same day Chun provided her statement, the message requiring his response within 72 hours. His attorney, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, responded that Brennan was declining the interview pending legal review of the investigation's scope and authority. Mitchell characterized the investigation as politically motivated overreach attempting to transform routine quality control into discrimination allegations. Wade documented Brennan's refusal to cooperate in his investigation file, noting that declining to participate was within Brennan's rights, but would prevent him from providing context for decisions that documentary evidence suggested lacked legitimate justification. The refusal itself became additional evidence of Brennan's unwillingness to defend his challenge through substantive engagement with the technical record. Rodriguez received a copy of Brennan's refusal notification through official channels, recognizing the strategic error Brennan had committed. The investigation no longer depended on Brennan's cooperation because the documentary evidence and witness testimony provided sufficient foundation for conclusions about systemic patterns. Brennan's silence meant he'd forfeited opportunity to explain actions that statistics and first-hand accounts portrayed as discriminatory. By the investigation's second week, Wade had interviewed 12 witnesses, reviewed qualification record from 8 Marine Corps installations, and documented patterns showing female Marines in sniper specialties faced delays at 4.2 times the rate of male counterparts when controlling for performance metrics. The pattern persisted across different commands, different time periods, and different decision-makers, suggesting institutional culture rather than isolated individual bias. Holland received Wade's preliminary findings 30 days into the investigation, the report documenting sufficient evidence to support formal conclusions that Marine Corps policies regarding female Marines in combat arms specialties were not being implemented consistently with stated equal opportunity standards. Wade recommended policy reforms, including mandatory timeline enforcement for qualification approvals, transparent criteria for training opportunity selections, and oversight mechanisms to identify and correct disparate treatment patterns before they accumulated into 18-month histories of systematic disadvantage. The investigation continued toward its 90-day conclusion, but the preliminary findings triggered immediate action from Marine Corps headquarters. Chen's qualification was already approved, but the broader pattern Wade had documented required institutional response that would affect hundreds of female Marines in specialties where performance alone hadn't been sufficient to ensure equal treatment. Kevin Martinez had been covering defense issues for the San Diego Tribune for 8 years, long enough to recognize when anonymous tips carried weight versus when they represented disgruntled personnel airing personal grievances. The email that arrived Tuesday morning fell into the former category, providing specific details about a Marine sniper at Camp Pendleton who'd achieved a record-breaking shot but faced command resistance to official recognition. The tip included Chen's name, the shot distance of 3,247 meters, and the date of qualification. Martinez spent 2 hours searching public records and defense databases, finding minimal information about Chen beyond her assignment to Camp Pendleton and her rank. The shot distance, if accurate, would exceed the previous record held by a British sniper in Afghanistan by over 400 meters. He contacted Camp Pendleton Public Affairs, reaching Captain Stevens, who handled media inquiries for base operations. Martinez requested information about Chen's qualification, noting he'd received reports about an exceptional achievement that might be newsworthy for defense publications. Stevens provided the standard response about personnel qualification records generally not being released to media, though he confirmed Chen was assigned to the base and worked in scout sniper operations. Stevens asked about Martinez's source for the information, a question the reporter deflected with practiced ease while noting that Stevens seemed unsurprised by the inquiry. "That's the third call I've received about this Marine this week," Stevens admitted. "Someone's definitely interested in getting her story out there." Martinez contacted Tom Harrison, a retired Marine Scout sniper who'd served as technical consultant for several of Martinez's previous articles about long-range shooting. Harrison's reaction to the distance claim was immediate and emphatic. 3,247 meters, Harrison said. "That's extraordinary. Top 5 confirmed kills ever recorded globally." Previous record was held by a British sniper at 2,815 meters. Harrison explained the technical challenges involved at that distance. Bullet flight time exceeding 6 seconds, Coriolis effect requiring significant compensation, environmental variables across nearly 2 miles of atmosphere. "The shot would require exceptional skill and perfect execution," he stated. "Not something that happens through luck or equipment advantage alone." Martinez drafted his article carefully, confirming facts he could verify through official channels while avoiding speculation about why media inquiries were increasing. The piece ran online Wednesday morning with the headline "Marine Corporal May Have Broken Long-Range Shooting Record at Camp Pendleton." The article confirmed the shot distance, quoted Harrison about technical difficulty, and noted that the Marine Corps was reviewing qualification documentation through standard procedures. Defense News picked up the story within 3 hours, military times followed by afternoon. The distance and potential record implications generated immediate interest across defense media outlets, though none had access to the verification footage or technical data that would confirm the achievement definitively. Brennan discovered the article through a link forwarded by another SEAL officer who'd seen it circulating through Naval Special Warfare channels. He read the piece twice, noting that it confirmed Chen's qualification was under review, but made no mention of his challenge or the reasons for administrative processing. The article portrayed the situation as routine verification of an exceptional achievement rather than a disputed claim requiring technical investigation. He drafted an email to 15 colleagues in the SEAL community, describing the article as Marines generating false publicity for questionable achievements. "The verification is suspect," he wrote, "under review by commands who recognize the claimed distance exceeds realistic capabilities. Multiple technical concerns about equipment reliability and calibration standards. The email characterized Chen's shot as possible equipment malfunction being promoted for positive press coverage rather than legitimate record that had withstood rigorous technical scrutiny. Brennan sent the message from his personal email account rather than official channels, marking it as professional communication among operators discussing standards maintenance in their shared specialty. One recipient, a SEAL commander who'd worked with Rodriguez on a previous joint operation, read Brennan's email with growing concern. He knew Rodriguez as thorough and technically competent, unlikely to support questionable claims regardless of political pressure. The characterization of Marines rushing publicity for unverified achievements contradicted what he understood about Marine Corps qualification procedures, which were generally more conservative than those employed by SEAL teams. The commander forwarded Brennan's email to Rodriguez with a brief note. Thought you should see how this is being characterized in NSW circles. Rodriguez received the message Thursday morning. Reading Brennan's description of suspect verification and equipment concerns with a mix of frustration and recognition that the challenge was continuing despite official dismissal. Martinez, the Tribune reporter, received the forwarded email Thursday afternoon through a source who felt Marines should know about communications attempting to undermine their qualified personnel. He read Brennan's characterization carefully, noting the discrepancy between the email's claims about ongoing review and what Stevens had told him about Chen's qualification status. Martinez contacted Stevens again, requesting clarification about whether Chen's qualification remained under review or had been finalized. Stevens consulted with his superiors before responding that Corporal Chen's qualification had been officially approved 3 days prior and was being submitted to Marine Corps Marksmanship Program for record consideration. The review Brennan referenced in his email had concluded with approval of all verification procedures. The reporter recognized a story developing beyond simple record achievement. Someone with apparent authority was actively disputing an officially approved qualification, suggesting institutional conflict that made the technical achievement secondary to questions about how the Marine Corps handled challenges to female Marines' documented performance. Martinez began drafting a follow-up article when his phone rang with a call from another defense reporter who'd received similar information about disputes surrounding Chen's qualification. The story was spreading through defense media networks, generating interest in both the technical achievement and the apparent resistance it had encountered from someone in naval special warfare. Rodriguez forwarded Brennan's email to Morrison, who immediately contacted Kaufman. The colonel's reaction was sharp and immediate, recognizing that Brennan was continuing to question officially approved qualifications despite the review meeting's conclusions. Kaufman contacted Captain Richards at Naval Special Warfare Group 3, Brennan's commanding officer, requesting a meeting to address the continuing communications. Richards reviewed Brennan's email with visible frustration, having believed the matter resolved after the formal review dismissed the technical challenge. He directed Brennan to cease public comments about Chen's qualification pending any legal consultation Brennan's attorney deemed necessary. The email demonstrated direct violation of that guidance, sent after the directive was issued and documented through digital timestamp. Wade received notification of Brennan's email through Rodriguez's official reporting channel, adding the communication to his investigation file as evidence of continued obstruction after qualification approval. The email demonstrated Brennan's persistence in questioning verified achievements despite lacking technical foundation for his concerns, and his willingness to characterize official Marine Corps decisions as questionable through informal channels reaching naval special warfare personnel. Holland was briefed on the email by Friday morning, her response immediate and decisive. Brennan's actions had escalated from filing a baseless challenge to actively attempting to undermine an officially approved qualification through communications that contradicted documented evidence. The behavior suggested someone unwilling to accept institutional findings that contradicted his preconceptions about who could achieve exceptional performance in specialties he considered domain of male operators. Wade's investigation expanded to include witness tampering allegations, documenting the pattern of Brennan's communications after official approval as potential violations of direct orders to cease commentary. Holland directed the case referred to Naval Criminal Investigative Service for review under Uniform Code of Military Justice provisions governing failure to obey orders, conduct unbecoming an officer, and false official statements. The Tribune published Martinez's follow-up article Friday afternoon. Questions surround Marine sniper's record achievement. The piece detailed the technical verification Chen's shot had received, quoted Harrison again about the achievement's legitimacy, and noted that unnamed sources suggested institutional resistance to recognizing the accomplishment despite official approval from Marine Corps qualification authorities. The article didn't name Brennan, but referenced communications from Naval Special Warfare personnel questioning Marine Corps verification standards. Stevens declined to comment on internal review procedures, but confirmed that Chen's qualification had been approved through established protocols and submitted for official record consideration. Chen read both articles on her phone Friday evening, sitting in her quarters while the story transformed from personal achievement into institutional controversy that extended beyond anything she'd anticipated when she'd lined up that shot 2 weeks earlier. Martinez had reached out requesting interview, but she declined through Stevens, preferring to let official channels handle media engagement while the investigation proceeded. Rodriguez and Hayes monitored the media coverage, recognizing that public attention complicated investigations by creating external pressure on commands to demonstrate they'd addressed identified problems. The coverage also made retaliation more difficult by creating witnesses beyond military chains of command who'd notice if Marines who'd identified discrimination patterns suddenly faced career obstacles. The weekend passed with the story circulating through military social media and defense forums, generating debates about verification standards, institutional bias, and whether SEAL resistance to Marine achievements represented inter-service rivalry or something more problematic. By Monday morning, the story had reached sufficient prominence that Marine Corps Headquarters Public Affairs was fielding media inquiries from national outlets requesting comment on the verification procedures and any investigations into the reported resistance. Holland authorized limited public disclosure, confirming that an investigation was underway examining qualification and training opportunity procedures at multiple installations, though specific details remain protected under investigation protocols. The statement acknowledged Chen's qualification as officially approved while noting that Marine Corps commitment to equal opportunity required periodic review of implementation practices to ensure policies were being followed consistently across all installations and specialties. The media attention transformed the case from internal administrative matter into public issue that would require transparent resolution, demonstrating the Marine Corps took seriously its obligations to evaluate all Marines based on performance rather than demographics. Brennan's attempts to question approved qualifications through informal channels had inadvertently elevated the visibility of patterns Wade's investigation was documenting, creating momentum for reforms that might otherwise have proceeded through bureaucratic channels without generating institutional commitment to meaningful change. Wade received the forwarded email Monday morning with a timestamp showing Brennan had sent his message to 15 SEAL colleagues 3 days after Chen's qualification received official approval. The recipient who'd passed it to Rodriguez had included a note explaining he felt Marines deserved to know about communications attempting to undermine their qualified personnel. Wade documented the email in his investigation file, recognizing it as potential evidence of obstruction continuing after formal resolution. The timing was particularly significant. Kaufman's review meeting had concluded with explicit dismissal of Brennan's challenge and approval of Chen's qualification. 3 days later, Brennan was characterizing that approved qualification as suspect and under review by commands who recognized problems with the verification. The discrepancy between official decisions and Brennan's private communications suggested someone unwilling to accept institutional findings that contradicted his assessment. Wade contacted Richards at Naval Special Warfare Group 3, requesting a meeting to discuss Brennan's continuing statements about Chen's qualification. Richards agreed to meet that afternoon, his tone suggesting he was already aware complications had developed beyond the initial challenge that he believed resolved through proper channels. The meeting occurred via secure video conference, Richards appearing from his office at Coronado, while Wade connected from Marine Corps headquarters. Wade presented Brennan's email alongside the timeline, showing it had been sent after qualification approval, after the formal review meeting, and after Richards had presumably directed his officer to let the matter rest pending any legal consultation. Richards' expression tightened as he read the email. "I specifically directed Commander Brennan to cease public comments about this qualification," he said. "That directive was issued in writing the day after the review meeting concluded. This email violates that direct order." Wade documented Richards' statement, noting the existence of written orders that Brennan had apparently disregarded. The violation transformed the situation from administrative dispute into potential UCMJ matter involving failure to obey lawful orders from a superior officer. Wade asked whether Richards had retained copies of the directive he'd issued. Richards accessed his files and transmitted the order through secure channels. The document was dated May 29th, the day after Kaufman's review meeting. It directed Brennan in explicit language to cease all communications regarding Corporal Chen's qualification pending completion of any legal review his attorney deemed appropriate. Brennan's signature appeared on the acknowledgement line, indicating he'd received and understood the order. He signed this and then sent that email the next day, Wade observed, comparing the directive date with the email timestamp. Richards nodded, his frustration evident. "Commander Brennan assured me he understood the directive and would comply," he said. "This email suggests either deliberate disregard for direct orders or interpretation so narrow as to be effectively defiant." Wade added witness testimony allegations to his investigation scope, documenting the pattern of Brennan's actions from initial challenge through continuing communications after official approval. The pattern showed escalation rather than acceptance, filing challenge without examining evidence, refusing to cooperate with EO investigation, violating direct orders to cease commentary, attempting to influence opinions through informal channels that characterized approved decisions as questionable. Morrison received a contact from Marine Corps Marksmanship Program Tuesday morning. The call initially routine regarding Chen's submitted qualification documentation. The conversation shifted when the program administrator mentioned they'd received an inquiry questioning whether verification review had been completed before record consideration could proceed. The inquiry had come through Naval Special Warfare channels, specifically from a SEAL lieutenant who'd characterized the shot as requiring additional scrutiny before official record status could be granted. Morrison documented the contact and reported it immediately to Wade, recognizing that Brennan's resistance had extended beyond private emails into attempts to influence the formal record review process. Wade investigated the inquiry, discovering it had been made by Lieutenant Daniels from Naval Special Warfare Group 3, the same command where Brennan served. Wade contacted Daniels, who initially seemed confused about why NCIS was calling regarding what he'd understood as routine technical consultation. Under questioning, Daniels explained that Brennan had asked him to check on the Marine record claim, suggesting that verification might not be complete and that marksmanship program should ensure all documentation was properly reviewed before granting official status. "Did Commander Brennan characterize the shot as legitimate or questionable when he asked you to make this inquiry?" Wade asked. Daniels hesitated before answering. He said the Marines were rushing a dubious claim through for publicity purposes, "Sir," he replied. He suggested I verify that proper procedures were being followed before the record was finalized. Wade documented Daniels' statement, recognizing that Brennan had used a subordinate to continue questioning and approve qualification after being ordered to cease communications on matter. Daniels wasn't culpable, having believed he was following legitimate command guidance about ensuring proper procedures. But Brennan's actions demonstrated deliberate circumvention of direct orders through delegation to personnel unaware of the restrictions he faced. The witness tampering dimension added a third potential UCMJ violation to Wade's growing case file. Brennan had failed to obey direct orders, made false characterizations of officially approved qualifications, and used subordinates to continue obstruction efforts after being prohibited from doing so personally. Each action individually warranted investigation. Collectively, they suggested a pattern of conduct incompatible with commissioned officer responsibilities. Wade compiled his findings into a comprehensive evidence package for NCIS review. The package included Brennan's initial challenge filed without examining verification data, his refusal to cooperate with EO investigation despite multiple interview requests, Richard's written directive ordering cessation of communications with Brennan's signed acknowledgement, the email to 15 colleagues sent after that directive, and Daniel's testimony about being directed to question the approved record through official channels. Holland reviewed Wade's evidence package Wednesday morning, spending 90 minutes examining each component of the documented pattern. Brennan's actions had escalated systematically from initial dismissal to active obstruction campaign that continued despite official approval, direct orders, and ongoing investigation. The behavior suggested someone whose unwillingness to accept Chen's achievement outweighed his obligation to follow lawful orders and accept institutional decisions. Holland directed the case referred to NCIS for criminal investigation under UCMJ provisions. The referral cited potential violations of Article 92 regarding failure to obey direct orders, Article 107 regarding false official statements, Article 133 regarding conduct unbecoming an officer, and Article 134 regarding obstruction of justice. The referral requested NCIS determine whether sufficient evidence existed to support prosecution under military law. Navy leadership received notification that one of their officers faced potential UCMJ charges arising from his challenge to a Marine qualification. The notification included summary of evidence suggesting Brennan had filed baseless challenges, violated direct orders, and used subordinates to continue questioning officially approved achievements. The case created complications for naval special warfare, whose reputation for elite performance now included a commander whose resistance to recognizing a Marine's achievement had escalated into potential criminal conduct. Richards received official notification Thursday morning that Brennan was under NCIS investigation for multiple potential UCMJ violations. Richards was directed to ensure Brennan remained available for investigation and to preserve all documentation related to orders he'd issued regarding the Chun qualification matter. The notification made clear that Brennan's actions had transcended administrative disputes into conduct requiring criminal investigation by federal law enforcement. Brennan learned of the NCIS investigation through Richards, who summoned him to his office and presented the notification with barely controlled anger. "Your refusal to let this matter rest has created a criminal investigation," Richards told him. "You were ordered to cease communications. You signed acknowledgement of that order. Then you violated it within 24 hours and used a subordinate to continue your obstruction campaign." Brennan attempted to characterize his actions as professional discussions and technical consultations rather than violations of direct orders. Richards cut him off, stating that attorneys could argue interpretations later, but the documented facts showed clear defiance of written directives issued by his commanding officer. The NCIS investigation formally opened Friday morning, with Special Agent Rebecca Torres assigned as lead investigator. Torres reviewed Wade's EO investigation file, noting the transition from administrative equal opportunity matter into potential criminal conduct. The evidence showed a clear timeline of escalating resistance. May 15 challenge without evidence review. May 28 formal review dismissing challenge. May 29 written order to cease communications. May 30 email to 15 colleagues. June 2 direction to Daniels to question approved record. Torres identified 4 potential charges based on the documented pattern. Article 92 for disobeying Richards' direct order. Article 107 for false statements in his initial challenge filed without technical foundation. Article 133 for conduct unbecoming an officer through his campaign to undermine official decisions. Article 134 for obstruction through his efforts to prevent Chen's record from receiving proper recognition. The investigation that had begun with Rodriguez documenting verification of an exceptional shot had evolved through institutional discrimination patterns into criminal prosecution of an officer who'd refused to accept that a female Marine could achieve what he'd assumed remained domain of male operators. Each step of that evolution had been documented through official records, witness testimony, and Brennan's own communications that demonstrated his unwillingness to examine evidence before dismissing achievements that challenged his preconceptions about who belonged at the pinnacle of the marksmanship specialty both Marines and SEALs claimed as central to their combat effectiveness. Chen continued her training routine while the investigation proceeded, her qualification now officially approved and submitted for record consideration. The broader institutional response had moved beyond her control into channels where prosecutors and investigators would determine whether Brennan's resistance to recognizing her achievement constituted criminal conduct warranting court-martial proceedings. She'd made the shot, the verification was unimpeachable, and the obstruction campaign that followed had created consequences Brennan apparently hadn't anticipated when he dismissed her qualification without bothering to examine the 6 independent systems that confirmed what Martinez had seen through his spotting scope. A bullet striking home at a distance most people couldn't imagine reaching with small arms, fired by a Marine whose gender Brennan had considered disqualifying regardless of what the data showed. NCIS Special Agent Rebecca Torres began her investigation by reviewing the complete evidence file Wade had compiled during his equal opportunity investigation. The transition from administrative review to criminal probe required different evidentiary standards, but the underlying documentation remained solid. Brennan had made decisions and taken actions that were matters of record rather than disputed interpretation. Torres identified 4 potential charges that the evidence could support. Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice addressed failure to obey lawful orders, applicable to Brennan's violation of Richard's written directive. Article 107 covered false official statements, relevant to Brennan's challenge filed without examining verification data. Article 133 prohibited conduct unbecoming an officer and gentleman, encompassing Brennan's campaign to undermine officially approved decisions. Article 134 addressed general offenses, including obstruction of justice, through his efforts to prevent Chen's record recognition. Her first interview was with Richards, conducted at Naval Special Warfare Group 3 headquarters in Coronado. Richards provided the written directive he'd issued to Brennan on May 29th, the document ordering cessation of all communications regarding Chen's qualification pending legal review. Brennan's signature appeared on the acknowledgement line with date and timestamp showing he'd received and signed the order at 14:30 hours that day. Torres asked whether Richards had believed the directive was clear and unambiguous. Richards stated he'd drafted it specifically to prevent misunderstanding, using explicit language about ceasing communications rather than vague guidance that might allow narrow interpretation. The order prohibited Brennan from discussing, commenting on, or addressing matters related to Chen's qualification through any channels, official or informal. "When did you become aware Commander Brennan had violated this order?" Torres asked. Richards described learning about the email to 15 SEAL colleagues through Wade's investigation notification several days after Brennan had sent the message. The timing had shocked Richards, who believed his directive would end the matter while Brennan consulted with his attorney about any remaining concerns. Instead, Brennan had violated the order within 24 hours and then used a subordinate to continue questioning the approved qualification through official channels. Torres documented Richards' statement, noting that the commanding officer's testimony established both the existence of a lawful order and Brennan's violation of it. The signed acknowledgement eliminated any defense claiming Brennan hadn't understood or received the directive. The timeline showing violation within 1 day of signing demonstrated deliberate disregard rather than forgetfulness or confusion. Lieutenant Daniels arrived for his interview, visibly nervous, uncertain why NCIS had summoned him regarding what he'd understood as routine command business. Torres explained she was investigating potential misconduct by a superior officer and that Daniels appeared to be a witness rather than subject of investigation. His cooperation would help determine whether criminal charges were warranted. Daniels relaxed slightly and described Brennan's request that he contact Marine Corps Marksmanship Program regarding Chen's qualification. Brennan had characterized the situation as Marines rushing a dubious record claim through without proper verification review. He'd asked Daniels to check whether the program had completed its evaluation before granting official record status. Did Commander Brennan mention he'd been ordered to cease communications about this qualification? Torres asked. No, ma'am, Daniels replied. He presented it as legitimate concern about maintaining standards. I thought I was helping ensure proper procedures were followed. Torres documented that Brennan had concealed from Daniels the existence of orders prohibiting his involvement, using his subordinate as proxy to continue obstruction after being directly ordered to stop. Daniels wasn't culpable for following what he'd reasonably believed was legitimate command guidance, but his testimony demonstrated Brennan's deliberate circumvention of Richard's directive. Chen's interview occurred at Camp Pendleton, Torres traveling from the NCIS field office in San Diego to conduct it personally. She asked Chen to describe the impact of Brennan's challenge and continuing resistance on her career and professional reputation. Chen explained that the qualification delay had prevented her from being considered for instructor positions that required verified record achievements. A profile article from Shooting Illustrated magazine had been delayed 6 weeks pending verification completion, diminishing its impact when finally published. The delay affected more than timeline, Chen said. It created questions about whether my achievement was legitimate. People who didn't know the details assumed there must be problems with the verification if approval took weeks rather than days. Torres asked whether Chen had filed complaints about the discrimination patterns Rodriguez had documented. Chen replied that she'd been advised repeatedly to focus on performance and avoid making waves, guidance she'd interpreted as instruction to accept disparate treatment without protest. The institutional message was clear. Questioning decisions could damage her career more than the discriminatory decisions themselves. Had anyone explicitly told you not to file complaints? Torres asked. Captain Patterson told me to let the system work and not create problems during my qualification period, Chen replied. The implication was that raising discrimination concerns would label me as difficult and affect future opportunities. Torres documented the retaliation concerns that had prevented Chen from reporting the systematic delays until Rodriguez's investigation brought them to command attention. The pattern suggested institutional culture that discouraged complaints through implied career threats rather than explicit prohibitions that would violate equal opportunity regulations. Torres compiled her evidence package over 2 weeks, assembling documentation that showed Brennan's actions from initial challenge through continuing obstruction. The package included his challenge file without technical foundation, his refusal to examine verification data before questioning Chen's achievement, Richard's written order with Brennan's signed acknowledgement, the email sent in violation of that order, Daniel's testimony about being directed to continue questioning the approved qualification, and Chen's statement about professional impact. She presented her findings to Navy Judge Advocate General Prosecution Division, recommending charges under 3 UCMJ articles. Article 92 for disobeying Richard's lawful order, supported by the written directive, signed acknowledgement, and email sent in violation. Article 107 for false official statements in his challenge that claimed equipment concerns without examining equipment records. Article 133 for conduct unbecoming an officer through his campaign to undermine official Marine Corps decisions and damage Chen's professional reputation. Torres recommended against charging under Article 134, concluding that the obstruction elements were adequately covered by the conduct unbecoming specification. The 3 charges represented distinct violations supported by documentary evidence and witness testimony that would withstand defense scrutiny. Navy JAG Captain Michael Rodriguez reviewed the evidence package, spending 3 days examining each component to ensure prosecutorial merit. The case was strong on the Article 92 charge, with written orders and clear violations documented through data communications. The Article 107 charge required proving Brennan knew his statements were false, which his admission of not reviewing evidence before filing challenge would support. The Article 133 charge encompassed his broader pattern of attempting to damage Chen's career and undermine institutional decisions. Rodriguez determined sufficient evidence existed to proceed with court-martial charges on all three specifications. The case met the threshold for general court-martial given Brennan's rank and the seriousness of allegations involving an officer's willful disobedience of direct orders from his commanding officer. Rodriguez convened an Article 32 preliminary hearing to review evidence and determine whether the case should proceed to trial. Brennan received notification of charges and hearing date 12 days after Torres completed her investigation. The notification detailed three specifications: violating Richard's direct order prohibiting communications about Chen's qualification, filing false official statements by challenging verified qualifications without examining evidence, and conduct unbecoming an officer through his campaign to prevent recognition of Chen's officially approved achievement. Each charge carried potential penalties, including dismissal from service, forfeiture of pay and allowances, and confinement. Brennan contacted his attorney Mitchell, who'd been providing legal consultation throughout the investigation. Mitchell reviewed the charges and recommended Brennan invoke his Article 31 rights to remain silent during NCIS investigation, advice Brennan had already followed by declining Torres' interview requests. The Article 32 hearing was scheduled for 11 days from notification, the preliminary proceeding that would determine whether sufficient evidence existed to refer the case to general court-martial. Brennan would have opportunity to present defense, but faced the documented reality of his actions. Orders he'd signed, emails he'd sent, subordinates he'd directed, and qualifications he'd questioned without examining the verification systems that 6 different technical methods had confirmed beyond reasonable dispute. Torres had built a case that statistics and documentary evidence made difficult to refute through testimony alone. Brennan's defense would require explaining why he'd violated direct orders from his commanding officer, why he'd filed challenges without reviewing evidence, and why he'd continued questioning officially approved qualifications through both direct communications and proxy contacts after being explicitly prohibited from doing so. The answers to those questions would determine whether his career survived the investigation that had grown from his refusal to accept that Sean had achieved what he'd assumed impossible for someone whose gender didn't match his expectations about who belonged at the pinnacle of the marksmanship specialty both services claimed as central to their combat identity. Rodriguez and Hayes monitored the case progression through official channels, recognizing that Torres' investigation had transformed their documentation of discriminatory patterns into criminal prosecution of an officer who'd elevated his resistance beyond administrative dispute into violations of military law. The system was holding Brennan accountable not just for discriminating against Chun, but for his continuing refusal to accept institutional decisions once those decisions have been rendered through proper channels and confirmed by authorities with jurisdiction to make them final. Chun continued her training while prosecutors prepared for the Article 32 hearing, her qualification now officially recognized and submitted for record consideration regardless of whatever legal proceedings Brennan faced. She'd made the shot, the verification was complete, and the obstruction that followed had generated consequences extending far beyond anything involved in simply recognizing an exceptional achievement that 6 independent systems had confirmed the moment Martinez called target impact at a distance that would be discussed in marksmanship circles for decades after everyone involved had moved beyond the controversy that should never have existed if Brennan had simply examined the evidence before deciding what Chun could or couldn't accomplish. The Article 32 preliminary hearing convened at Naval Base San Diego on a Thursday morning in late June, 6 weeks after Chun had fired the shot that set everything in motion. Commander Patricia Walsh presided as hearing officer, her responsibility to determine whether sufficient evidence existed to refer the case to general court-martial or whether charges should be dismissed or reduced. The hearing room held prosecution and defense tables, witness seating, in a gallery where Rodriguez, Hayes, and Morrison sat as observers. Chen arrived with Martinez, both in service uniforms, prepared to testify if called, but not required to attend the preliminary proceeding. Brennan sat at the defense table beside Mitchell, his expression controlled as Walsh reviewed the charge sheets and convened the hearing officially. Prosecutor Jag, Captain Rodriguez, presented the government's case methodically, building a timeline that documented Brennan's actions from May 15th through June 2nd. The presentation began with Chen's qualification, verified by 6 independent systems on equipment calibrated that morning and functioning within specification. Brennan had observed celebrations at the range, but declined to examine any verification data before filing his formal challenge 90 minutes later. The first charge specification addressed Article 107, false official statements. Rodriguez presented Brennan's written challenge claiming equipment concerns without his having reviewed calibration records, camera footage, ballistic computer logs, or any technical documentation. Morrison testified that Brennan had been offered opportunity to examine all verification materials, but refused, stating professional judgment made review unnecessary. Defense counsel Mitchell Cross examined Morrison about whether challenges required pre-filing evidence review under Marine Corps regulations. Morrison acknowledged no regulation specifically mandated examination before filing challenges, though he noted standard practice involved reviewing data before questioning verification procedures that 6 different systems confirmed independently. Walsh asked Morrison directly whether Brennan had requested access to verification materials at any point. Morrison replied that Brennan had never requested documentation review, despite being informed multiple times that complete records were available for his examination. Torres testified next, describing her NCIS investigation and the evidence she compiled. She walked through Brennan's refusal to cooperate with Wade's equal opportunity investigation, his characterization of that investigation as politically motivated overreach, and his pattern of dismissing Chen's achievement without engaging substantively with technical verification data. Mitchell challenged Torres about whether refusal to participate in administrative investigations constituted criminal conduct. Torres clarified that the refusal itself wasn't criminal but demonstrated Brennan's unwillingness to defend his technical concerns through examination of evidence, suggesting his challenge lacked foundation he could articulate when required to do so formally. The second charge specification addressed Article 92, failure to obey lawful orders. Richards testified about issuing written directive to Brennan on May 29th, requiring cessation of all communications regarding Chen's qualification. He produced the directive with Brennan's signature acknowledging receipt and understanding at 14:30 hours that day. Rodriguez presented Brennan's email sent May 30th to 15 SEAL colleagues, timestamped less than 24 hours after Brennan had signed acknowledgement of Richards' order. The email characterized Chen's approved qualification as suspect and under review, directly contradicting the official approval Kaufman had issued and violating the order prohibiting Brennan from communicating about the matter. Mitchell argued the email constituted private professional discussion rather than public commentary prohibited by Richards' directive. Richards responded that his order had been explicit about ceasing all communications, official or informal, and that Brennan's email to 15 military personnel hardly qualified as private conversation. Walsh questioned whether Richards had discussed with Brennan the scope of the communications prohibition. Richards stated he drafted the order specifically to prevent narrow interpretation, using language about all communications through any channels to eliminate ambiguity about what conduct was prohibited. Lieutenant Daniels testified about Brennan's request that he contact Marine Corps marksmanship program regarding Chen's qualification. Daniels explained that Brennan had characterized the shot as dubious and suggested verification might be incomplete, asking Daniels to check whether proper procedures were being followed before record status was granted. "Did Commander Brennan inform you he'd been ordered to cease involvement in this matter?" Rodriguez asked. "No, sir," Daniels replied. He presented it as normal command interest in maintaining standards. I didn't know about any orders restricting his involvement. Rodriguez established that Brennan had used a subordinate to continue questioning Chen's approved qualification after being directly ordered to stop, concealing from Daniels the restrictions Richards had imposed. The testimony demonstrated deliberate circumvention of lawful orders through delegation to personnel unaware of prohibitions Brennan faced. The third charge specification addressed Article 133, Conduct Unbecoming an Officer. Rodriguez presented the complete pattern of Brennan's actions, challenging qualifications without evidence review, refusing to accept official findings, violating direct orders, using subordinates to continue obstruction, and characterizing approved Marine Corps decisions as dubious through communications that damaged both Chen's professional reputation and institutional credibility. Chen testified about the impact of Brennan's actions on her career progression and professional standing. She described opportunities delayed while qualification remained under challenge. The magazine article postponed 6 weeks, diminishing its impact, and questions raised about her achievements' legitimacy by people who assumed verification problems must exist if approval required extended review. Mitchell attempted to portray Chen as seeking special recognition beyond what male Marines received for similar achievements. Chen responded that her only request was the same treatment male Marines with verified qualifications received, timely approval based on documented evidence rather than assumptions about what her gender made possible or impossible. Rodriguez asked Chen whether she'd experienced discrimination in other aspects of her career beyond this qualification. Chen described the 18-month pattern Rodriguez had documented: training opportunities denied despite meeting requirements, qualifications delayed beyond standard timelines, equipment requests processed slower than male counterparts with equivalent needs. Mitchell objected that discrimination patterns weren't relevant to charges against Brennan. Walsh sustained the objection for prosecutorial record, but noted that evidence of broader patterns provided context for understanding Brennan's resistance as part of institutional culture rather than isolated disagreement about technical procedures. Defense presentation consisted primarily of character witnesses describing Brennan's 16-year service record, his operational deployments, his leadership of SEAL teams through combat missions, and his reputation among naval special warfare personnel. 3 officers testified that Brennan had consistently demonstrated professionalism and commitment to maintaining high standards in specialties where lives depended on accurate capability assessment. Mitchell argued that Brennan's actions reflected legitimate concern about verification procedures rather than bias against female Marines. He characterized the challenge as routine quality control, the email as professional discussion among operators sharing concerns, and the contact through Daniels as normal command interest in ensuring proper standards were maintained. Rodriguez rebutted in closing statement, noting that legitimate concern would have prompted Brennan to examine verification data rather than dismiss it without review. Professional discussion would have engaged with technical evidence rather than characterizing approved decisions as dubious without foundation. Normal command interest would have accepted institutional findings once rendered rather than continuing obstruction through multiple channels after being ordered to stop. Walsh recessed the hearing for 4 hours while she reviewed evidence and testimony. The gallery emptied into the corridor where Rodriguez and Hayes waited with Morrison, discussing the presentations and anticipating Walsh's determination about whether evidence supported court-martial referral. Chen and Martinez sat in a separate waiting area, both knowing the preliminary hearing was procedural hurdle rather than final judgment. The evidence would either be deemed sufficient for trial or inadequate to proceed, but the underlying facts remained unchanged regardless of what Walsh decided about prosecutorial merit. Walsh reconvened the hearing at 1500 hours, her decision documented in written findings she read into the record. She determined that sufficient evidence existed to support court-martial on all 3 charge specifications. The Article 92 charge was supported by written orders, signed acknowledgement, and documented violations through both direct and proxy communications. The Article 107 charge was supported by Brennan's admission of filing challenges without reviewing technical data he'd been offered opportunity to examine. The Article 133 charge was supported by the pattern of conduct showing Brennan had elevated disagreement beyond legitimate professional concern into campaign to undermine official decisions and damage Chen's career. Walsh referred the case to General Court Martial with trial date set for September 12, 11 weeks from the preliminary hearing. Brennan would face prosecution before a panel of his peers on charges that, if proven, would end his 16-year military career through dismissal from service, forfeiture of pay and allowances, and potential confinement, depending on sentence determination. Mitchell requested delay to prepare defense, arguing that 11 weeks provided insufficient time for investigation and witness preparation. Walsh denied the request, noting that Brennan had been aware of potential charges since early June and had access to all evidence through discovery procedures that Navy JAG had expedited per standard court-martial protocols. The hearing concluded with Brennan released to Richard's custody pending trial, his duties restricted to administrative functions that didn't involve training, oversight, or personnel decisions. The restrictions ensured he couldn't influence witnesses or affect Chen's continued service while criminal proceedings advanced toward resolution. Rodriguez left the hearing room knowing the case would proceed to trial where Brennan would face evidence he'd been unable to refute during preliminary proceedings. The signed orders, the documented violations, the witness testimony, and the pattern of escalating resistance had survived defense scrutiny at the Article 32 level. Whether they would survive a trial before a panel empowered to render binding verdict remained to be determined through proceedings that would conclude either with Brennan's exoneration or the end of his military career. The General Court Martial convened September 12th at Naval Base San Diego, with 7 panel members seated to render verdict: 2 Navy captains for commanders and 1 lieutenant commander, all officers with sufficient rank and experience to judge conduct expected of someone holding Brennan's position. Military Judge Captain Andrew Bennett presided over proceedings that would determine whether Brennan's 16-year career ended in dismissal or whether defense could create sufficient doubt about his culpability. Brennan entered his plea of not guilty to all 3 specifications, his posture erect and controlled as Bennett reviewed the charges for the record. Article 92 for disobeying Richard's direct order. Article 107 for filing false official statements without examining verification evidence. Article 133 for conduct unbecoming an officer through his campaign to undermine Chen's officially approved qualification. Prosecutor JAG Captain Rodriguez delivered an opening statement that framed the case as a simple question about whether officers could disregard evidence, disobey orders, and damage careers when official findings contradicted their assumptions. Chen had achieved a verified record shot, Rodriguez stated. 6 independent systems confirmed the qualification. Commander Brennan dismissed it without examination, challenged it without technical foundation, and continued questioning it after being ordered to stop. This case is about an officer who placed ego above duty and refused to accept institutional decisions simply because they didn't align with his preconceptions about who could achieve exceptional performance. Defense counsel Mitchell countered that Brennan had acted from legitimate concern about maintaining standards and specialties, where capabilities directly affected mission success. Challenges to qualifications represented quality control rather than personal vendetta, Mitchell argued. Communications after review meeting represented professional discussions among operators, not willful violations of ambiguous directives. The case represented prosecution's attempt to criminalize reasonable disagreement about verification adequacy. The prosecution consumed 2 days presenting evidence through witnesses who'd testified previously at the Article 32 hearing. Watkins described equipment calibration procedures and confirmed Chen's rifle and ballistic computer had passed all diagnostics the morning of her shot. Hayes presented camera footage analysis showing bullet trajectory matched calculated path within 2% variance. Wade detailed his equal opportunity investigation that had documented systematic delays affecting female snipers, including Chun. Torres testified about her NCIS investigation, walking the panel through the timeline of Brennan's escalating resistance. May 15th challenge filed without evidence review. May 28th review meeting where Brennan admitted not examining documentation. May 29th written order from Richards prohibiting further communications. May 30th email to 15 colleagues characterizing approved qualification as suspect. June 2nd direction to Daniels to question the record through official channels. Mitchell cross-examined each witness, attempting to establish that Brennan's concerns reflected legitimate professional judgment rather than bias or misconduct. His questions focused on whether challenges required evidence review before filing, whether commanders could delegate inquiries to subordinates, whether email discussions among professionals violated orders about public communications. Richards proved the prosecution's strongest witness, his testimony devastatingly clear about the orders he'd issued and Brennan's violations. Mitchell attempted to suggest the directive had been ambiguous about what communications were prohibited. Richards produced the actual document and read the relevant language. Commander Brennan is hereby ordered to cease all communications regarding Corporal Chen's qualification through any channels, official or informal, pending completion of legal review. Is there ambiguity in the phrase, all communications through any channels? Rodriguez asked on redirect examination. None whatsoever, Richards replied. I drafted it specifically to prevent narrow interpretation or claims of misunderstanding. Chen testified on the third day, describing not just the immediate qualification delay, but the 18-month pattern of obstacles she'd faced despite performance that exceeded requirements. Mitchell's cross-examination attempted to portray her as overly sensitive to normal administrative timelines. Chen responded with specific comparisons showing male Marines with lower scores receiving faster approvals and more opportunities. You're suggesting that every delay you experienced was discriminatory, Mitchell said. I'm stating that delays affecting me and other female snipers occurred at 4 times the rate of male counterparts when controlling for qualification scores, Chen replied. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez documented that pattern using official records. Whether each individual delay was intentionally discriminatory or reflected institutional bias that operated without conscious intent, the cumulative effect was the same. Female Marines faced obstacles male Marines didn't encounter. The defense case occupied 1 day, presenting character witnesses who described Brennan's service record and professional reputation. 3 SEAL officers testified about operations they'd conducted under Brennan's leadership, his commitment to maintaining standards, his reputation for ensuring his teams operated at peak capability levels that kept people alive in combat environments. Mitchell called no technical experts to challenge Chen's qualification verification, no equipment specialists to support claims about calibration inadequacy, no ballistic analysts to question the 6 independent systems that had confirmed her shot. The absence of technical defense tacitly acknowledged what the evidence had demonstrated from the beginning. Chen's qualification was legitimate and Brennan had challenged it without foundation. Brennan declined to testify, invoking his right against self-incrimination. Mitchell presented his defense through written statement claiming Brennan had filed challenge based on professional experience, suggesting skepticism was appropriate for extreme-range claims, that communications after review represented technical discussions rather than prohibited commentary, that he hadn't realized directing Daniels to make inquiries violated Richards' order about personal communications. Rodriguez's closing statement methodically dismantled the defense narrative. Professional experience doesn't justify dismissing evidence without examination, he told the panel. Technical discussions don't involve characterizing officially approved qualifications as dubious and under review. Not realizing subordinate contacts violated orders, prohibiting personal involvement strains credibility when the orders explicitly prohibited involvement through any channels. He reminded the panel that Brennan had signed acknowledgement of Richards' directive, confirming his understanding that all communications were prohibited. 24 hours later, he'd sent email to 15 people questioning Chen's approved qualification. 3 days after that, he directed Daniels to contact official channels to continue questioning the record. These weren't mistakes or misunderstandings, Rodriguez argued. They were deliberate violations by an officer who refused to accept institutional decisions that contradicted his assumptions about who could achieve what he considered domain of male operators. Mitchell's closing emphasized Brennan's service record and asked the panel to consider whether one instance of disputed judgment warranted ending a career built through 16 years of dedication and operational success. He portrayed the charges as overreach, prosecution's attempt to criminalize professional disagreement about verification procedures. The panel deliberated 4 hours before requesting clarification from Bennett about the distinction between professional disagreement and failure to obey lawful orders. Bennett instructed them that officers could disagree with decisions but couldn't violate direct orders from superior officers regardless of whether they agreed with those orders or the institutional findings that prompted them. The panel returned 90 minutes later with verdict on each specification. Article 92 regarding failure to obey orders. Guilty. The written directive had been clear, the violations documented through time-stamped communications that occurred after Brennan had signed acknowledgement of the order. Article 133 regarding conduct unbecoming an officer. Guilty. The pattern of challenging qualifications without evidence review, refusing to accept official findings, violating direct orders, and using subordinates to continue obstruction demonstrated conduct incompatible with standards expected of commissioned officers. Article 107 regarding false official statements. Not guilty. The panel determined that while Brennan's challenge lacked technical foundation, prosecution hadn't proven beyond reasonable doubt that he knew his statements were false at the time he made them versus negligently dismissing evidence he should have examined. Bennett recessed for sentencing deliberations. The panel reconvened 3 hours later with determination that combined Brennan's service record with the seriousness of violations involving direct disobedience of orders and campaign to damage another service member's career. The sentence: dismissal from service, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, reduction to pay grade 1. Bennett announced the sentence formally, noting that dismissal was equivalent to dishonorable discharge for enlisted personnel and represented termination with prejudice of Brennan's commission. The conviction triggered automatic appeal to Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals, but the sentence would stand pending appellate review. Brennan showed no visible reaction as Bennett concluded proceedings and discharged the panel. Mitchell gathered documents while Brennan sat motionless, processing the end of a career that had defined his adult life. 16 years of service, multiple combat deployments, leadership of elite teams through operations that had generated commendations and ribbons, all concluded because he'd refused to examine evidence before deciding what a Marine corporal could accomplish, and then couldn't accept being wrong when 6 different systems proved his assumptions invalid. Rodriguez and Hayes left the courtroom knowing the conviction would stand on appeal absent significant procedural errors that nothing in the trial record suggested. The evidence had been overwhelming, the violations documented through Brennan's own communications, and the defense had offered no technical foundation for his challenge or justification for his continuing obstruction after official approval. Chun departed with Martinez, her expression neutral despite having just watched the man who'd questioned her achievement convicted and dismissed from service. She'd made the shot, the verification had stood against all challenges, and the obstruction that followed had generated consequences that extended from Brennan's career termination to institutional reforms Wade's investigation had prompted. The trial had answered the question Walsh's preliminary hearing had posed. Sufficient evidence existed to prove Brennan had violated military law through his refusal to accept that Chen's gender didn't determine what she could accomplish with a rifle at ranges most people couldn't visualize. The panel's verdict confirmed that officers who placed assumptions above evidence and ego above orders faced accountability through the same military justice system that governed all service members regardless of rank or reputation. Marine Corps Marksmanship Program officially recognized Chen's 3,247-meter shot on October 15th, 5 months after the morning, she'd lined up behind her rifle and made calculations that accounted for every variable across nearly 2 miles of atmosphere. The recognition came with technical breakdown by ballistics experts who analyzed the 6 verification systems and confirmed what Martinez had seen through his spotting scope. A legitimate achievement that represented the longest confirmed kill by active-duty United States military sniper, exceeding the previous record by over 400 meters. Marine Corps Times featured the accomplishment with detailed article explaining the physics involved, the environmental factors Chun had calculated correctly, and the verification procedures that had documented the shot through multiple independent methods. The article noted briefly that the qualification had faced initial challenge, but had been upheld after review, omitting details about Brennan's court-martial to focus on Chin's technical achievement rather than the controversy it had generated. Wade completed his equal opportunity investigation in November, issuing comprehensive report that documented systematic disparities affecting female Marines in sniper and designated marksman specialties across 8 installations. The statistical analysis showed female Marines faced qualification delays at 4.2 times the rate of male counterparts when controlling for performance scores, training opportunity denials at 3.8 times normal rates, and equipment request processing times averaging 6 weeks longer than equivalent requests for male Marines. Marine Corps issued policy directive based on Wade's recommendations, effective November 1st across all installations. Qualification decisions required documented technical review within 30 days of shot verification, with delays beyond that timeline requiring written justification reviewed by equal opportunity representatives. Range scheduling maintained proportional access regardless of gender, with allocation decisions subject to quarterly audit. Training opportunity selections required documented scoring criteria applied uniformly, with denials necessitating written explanation specifying which qualification requirements applicants failed to meet. Holland conducted review of the 7 personnel Wade had identified in his investigation. Patterson received non-punitive letter of caution for creating environment that discouraged Chun from raising legitimate concerns about disparate treatment. 2 range scheduling staff received counseling for allocation decisions, lacking documented justification for the priority given to SEAL teams over Marine Scout snipers at Marine Corps facilities. 4 others were cleared after review, determined their decisions fell within acceptable discretion parameters given the information available to them at the time. Rodriguez received promotion to gunnery sergeant on December 1st. His promotion citation noting exceptional initiative in identifying systemic issues and ensuring institutional accountability. He was assigned as equal opportunity representative for base operations with responsibility for reviewing qualification and training decisions. His first action in the new role involved auditing the previous 36 months of qualification approvals, applying statistical analysis to identify any remaining patterns that suggested disparate treatment requiring correction. Chun received invitation to Marine Corps Scout Sniper Instructor School for January class. The notification including personal note from the commandant acknowledging her exemplary performance and perseverance through adversity that would have deterred Marines with less commitment to excellence. She accepted the assignment, scheduled to begin instruction 8 weeks after receiving the invitation. The acceptance meant she'd be training the next generation of Marine snipers, ensuring they learned not just technical skills, but the importance of evaluating people based on demonstrated capability rather than assumptions about what gender or background determine possible achievement levels. Speaking of stories that inspire the next generation, this one shows how one person standing firm can create ripples that change entire systems. Has there been a time when you had to stand up for what was right, even when others doubted you? Drop your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to hear today to find their own courage. Marine Corps Association invited Chun to speak at their annual symposium about long-range shooting techniques, the invitation acknowledging her as subject matter expert whose achievement and technical knowledge qualified her to instruct senior personnel about extreme range marksmanship. She accepted, Her presentation scheduled for March and expected to draw attendance from Scout sniper instructors across multiple Marine divisions interested in understanding the calculations and procedures that had enabled her record shot. Brennan's appeal to Navy Marine Corps Court of Criminal Appeals was denied in March of the following year, 6 months after his court-martial conviction. The appellate court reviewed trial transcripts and found no procedural errors that would warrant overturning the verdict. The court's written opinion affirmed both conviction and sentence, noting that the evidence had demonstrated deliberate pattern of conduct incompatible with commissioned service. Brennan's dismissal became final, his name removed from Naval Special Warfare Hall of Honor, where it had previously appeared for deployment achievements from 2018. The removal from the Hall of Honor represented a erasure of legacy he'd built through years of operational service. His career remembered not for missions successfully completed, but for his refusal to accept evidence that contradicted assumptions about who belonged at the pinnacle of specialties both SEALs and Marines considered central to their combat effectiveness. The contrast between what his career could have been and what it became illustrated costs of allowing bias to override evidence and ego to override orders. Torres filed her final NCIS report documenting that Brennan's conviction had resolved the criminal investigation, but noting that the case had revealed institutional patterns requiring continued monitoring to ensure reforms were implemented consistently. Her report recommended annual audits of qualification and training opportunity data, comparing outcomes across demographic categories to identify emerging disparities before they accumulated into systematic patterns requiring investigation. 2 years after Chen's shot, Marine Corps published recruiting campaign featuring female snipers including Chun, Williams, Thompson, and Davis. The campaign emphasized marksmanship excellence and equal opportunity, using their achievements to demonstrate that the Marine Corps evaluated personnel based on demonstrated capability rather than preconceptions about who could succeed in combat armed specialties. The campaign generated increased interest from female recruits considering sniper specialties, applications rising 32% in the year following the campaign launch. Chen had been promoted to sergeant by then, serving as primary instructor at Scout Sniper School, where her responsibilities included teaching both technical marksmanship skills and the importance of evidence-based evaluation of personnel capabilities. In an interview for the recruiting campaign, she stated that her goal was ensuring every Marine with a skill gets the opportunity and every achievement receive the recognition it deserves, regardless of who accomplished it. The final scene of her interview was filmed at the 2,000-meter range, where she instructed a class of 12 Scout sniper students. 3 were women, a proportion that would have been unlikely 2 years earlier before Wade's investigation and the resulting policy reforms. Chun worked with each student individually, correcting positions and explaining environmental calculations with the same attention to technical detail that had characterized her own training under Martinez. Rodriguez watched from the observation tower as Chen's students took turns engaging targets at distances that required mastery of physics and shooting fundamentals. The reforms he'd helped initiate by documenting patterns that should never have existed were producing tangible results in the form of female Marines receiving opportunities based on qualification scores rather than facing obstacles their male peers never encountered. Hayes had been promoted to warrant officer, his technical expertise and statistical analysis skills recognized through assignment to Marine Corps Manpower and Reserve Affairs, where he worked on data-driven approaches to identifying and correcting disparities in personnel management. His database queries that had revealed Chen's case as part of broader pattern had demonstrated value of applying rigorous analysis to official records, finding problems that remained invisible until someone with appropriate access and analytical skills examined the underlying data. Martinez continued coaching Scout snipers at Camp Pendleton. His role expanded to include mentoring junior instructors about how to evaluate students based on performance rather than assumptions. He'd spent 3 years training Chun, watching her exceed standards while facing delays and denials that male Marines with lesser capabilities never experienced. The vindication of her achievement and the reforms that followed represented validation that persistence in documenting excellence eventually overcame institutional resistance to recognizing it. Kaufman remained as base commander, his handling of the Chun case becoming reference example for how senior officers should respond when presented with evidence of systematic problems requiring command attention. His decision to engage Holland immediately rather than attempting to resolve issues through local channels had enabled institutional response that addressed root causes rather than simply adjudicating individual disputes. The changes extended beyond policy directives and personnel assignments into cultural shifts that occurred when institutions demonstrated through actions that stated commitments to equal opportunity weren't merely aspirational language, but enforceable standards backed by accountability mechanisms. Female Marines considering sniper specialties saw Chen's achievement and the institutional response to attempts to diminish it, understanding that their capabilities would be evaluated based on demonstrated performance rather than assumptions about what their gender made possible. Chun continued her training routine with the same discipline that had characterized her approach before the record shot, that transformed from personal achievement into catalyst for institutional reform. She maintained her skills at ranges extending to the limits of what small arms could accomplish. Prepared for whatever missions might require the capabilities she'd proven on a morning when 6 different systems had confirmed what Martinez called through his spotting scope and what Brennan had refused to accept until a court-martial panel had delivered verdict that ended his career while hers continued building toward levels of expertise and leadership that would influence Marine Corps. Marksmanship programs for decades after the controversy surrounding her 3,247-meter shot had faded into history, remembered primarily as the moment when one Marine's exceptional achievement combined with another Marine's documentation of systematic problems to create reforms ensuring that excellence received recognition regardless of who achieved it.